Hello and welcome to this conversation with Cyril Dion, who has agreed to join us in conversation today about his film Animal. We're including this film and this conversation as part of a film series being presented now by the Maison Française in co-sponsorship with other partners at Columbia, including the Climate School and the Society of Fellows and Heyman Center for the Humanities. We're also presenting this in partnership with Albertine Cinémathèque. So we're really grateful to all of our partners for helping us present this film series and for inviting Cyril to join us. I'm Shanny and I'm going to be moderating this discussion. I'll first briefly introduce Cyril Dion and Leah Aronowsky, who's also joining us for this conversation. And I've committed to Cyril that we'll try to keep our discussion to 45 minutes because it's 8 o'clock there and I'm not sure if he's had dinner yet. So, and we will save time at the end of the conversation for questions from the audience. So if you have a question, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. You can submit a question at any time and we will hopefully have time to get to many of your questions at the end of our discussion. So first, a brief introduction. Cyril Dion is a man of many talents. He first studied theater and was a poet, still is a poet. And that led him to other work as a writer and now as a filmmaker. His earlier films include Demain or Tomorrow, which won a César for Best Documentary and has had much success all around the world. And it was followed by a sequel called After Tomorrow. Cyril is also very engaged politically in the climate movement. He was a co-founder of the ecological movement Colibri with friends in 2007 and directed that organization for 6 years. And he's been involved in activities including organizing climate marches. He wrote a Petit manuel de résistance contemporaine, which has not yet been translated into English. So if any of you out there have connections with publishers, we'd love to get it translated into English. He was also involved in what's called the Affaire du Siècle, which is a lawsuit that was launched by 4 NGOs and other people against the French state, suing the French state for its inaction on climate change, and was instrumental in convincing President Macron to organize a citizens' convention for climate, an experiment in deliberative democracy that randomly selected ordinary citizens and then asked them to deliberate and make recommendations about how France could reduce its carbon emissions. I think one of the reasons that Cyril Dion is such an effective advocate and climate activist is that he believes very strongly in the power of art, of beauty, of music, and he understands how important stories are for helping humanity find our way forward at this critical juncture and think differently about how we can be in the world. So, in fact, one reviewer in Libération said of his earlier film Demain that he, quote, succeeds in 1 hour and 58 minutes what decades of environmental struggle failed to do, lay the foundation for a new collective fiction. Joining us in conversation today is Leah Aronowsky. She is a historian working at the intersection of the history of science and environmental history. She's currently a fellow in the Society of Fellows and Heyman Center for the Humanities. And her current book project is a history of the climate crisis told through alternating lenses of the history of climate science, the history of climate governments, and the history of capitalism. So the film that we've come together to talk about initially, we'll start with a discussion of the film and then we can broaden it to include other topics, is Animal. It came out in December 2021 and was selected for the Cannes Film Festival. It is about the sixth mass extinction of life on the Earth. And it's told through the eyes of 2 teenage climate activists, Bella Lack, an English girl growing up in the countryside, and Vipulan Bhuvaneswaran, a French 16-year-old who lives in Paris. And it follows them as they travel around to meet with different experts and try to understand why this extinction is occurring and to think about what, if anything, we can do to slow it down. More broadly, this film really does a wonderful job of following these two teenagers as they look for different ways of being in the world, different ways of relating to the natural world. So Shanny, thank you, congratulations, and thank you so much for offering us this beautiful film and for all of your other work. And I am going to first turn to Leah, who is going to share some of her reactions and thoughts about Animal, and then we can segue into a discussion. Leah?
Thanks, Shanny. Cyril, I hope it's okay. I'm just going to sort of tell you some of my impressions as a total layperson. But I want to start by really commending you for a wonderful film. And as Shanny mentioned, I'm a historian of climate science, and I teach a lot about the history of the climate crisis. And I'm really excited to use this in my teaching. And I think I have more to say about this, but it's really speaking to a conundrum I see a lot of my students grappling with, which is how to inhabit the world as someone who cares deeply about the climate and biodiversity, while still inevitably grappling with the fact that it's a fossil fuel based and plastic world that we live in. So it was really sort of heartening and energizing to see that play out on film with Vipulin and Bella. So that was sort of my immediate sort of excitement around the film. But I can also talk a little bit about the sort of takeaways I saw sort of as a historian of the environment. And one thing I really appreciated about the film was the way that it's really working to educate the viewer. You introduced the idea of ecosystem services, the degrowth movement, biodynamic farming, but you're really doing it in a way that doesn't feel at all didactic, and that feels really new to me, right? It's like, it's not the sort of PowerPoint in inconvenient truth style of telling of teaching really complicated topics. So that's really impressive. And I also wanted to flag how much I appreciate the film's commitment to aesthetics and sort of the formal language of landscape photography that's going on in the film at various points, and sort of leaning into those moments of the sublime, even, you know, the sort of pan of the suburban American sprawl is just, you know, and the way you really lean into that is just so powerful. And I thought it was spectacular. So I think things we could try to talk about today is the fact that your film is leaning into the idea that there are no easy answers here when it comes to the twin crises of biodiversity and climate. I think one of the most powerful things I took from the film is the way that it really sits with Bella and Vipulin as they grapple with these various ethical quandaries and contradictions that the various solutions they're exploring raise, right? And one of the most powerful scenes for me was the French rabbit farm scene. And it was really amazing to see the subtle shift that happens in tone during that scene, right? And how Bella and Vipulin evolve from seeing the farmer as the enemy to sort of seeing him as a victim and caught up in this oppressive system and sort of a modern day form of indentured servitude, and just seeing them grapple with thinking of seeing the farmer as himself embedded in a system. And I think that's really rare to see represented on film, but also something that I've seen my own students grapple with their relationship to veganism versus sustainable farming, and trying to find their way through these complicated questions. And I think more generally, you know, hearing Bella reflect on her feeling of being a hypocrite before she gets on the airplane really just speaks to this contradiction that young people that everyone's grappling with, but I think young people seem to feel most acutely about trying to live ethically in a world where they're embedded in these systems that are killing the planet. And that really came through in the scene with Afro Shah. And I think it was Bella who is reflecting in the market afterwards about just how all the products that are made with plastic that are going to turn up on the beach a few years later, probably. So I think maybe another point I would want to put on the table for us to talk about, and I'll sort of end here with my comments, is just the closing message, which I found really powerful. And it's again coming through Bella, the shift from an anti-humanist stance to trying to think about humans as deeply complex animals, and thinking that it's not, the solution is not sort of a nihilist position, but rather thinking about how it is that we can learn to live differently in the world. And I really appreciate that the overall message of the film is to ask more questions maybe than it leaves answered. And I think that is a really fair presentation of the state of climate politics today, right? A lot of conundrums about where to go next and how to proceed when in the face of a problem that's truly global in scale. So these are just some of my responses to the wonderful film you gave us.
Thank you so much. I feel honored and understood. So that's great. And actually the sequence with the farmer in the rabbit factory is one of my favorite too. Because it's a complex one, and there is no good guy and bad guy in it, and there's just, you know, people, as you said, embedded in the system and trying to find how to deal with it. And to me, the main objective of the movie was to try to have a conversation about what is the source, what is the main cause of the ecological crisis. And to me, these days we're mainly talking about climate change, and when we're talking about climate change, we're talking about decarbonation of society, like we're going to have electric cars instead of regular cars and so on, just as if it would, you know, solve the problem. And it's not going to solve the problem, because you can keep on destroying ecosystems while you are, you know, building electric cars, definitely. And to me, the really source of that situation is the fact that at some point we just figured, and that is really something that came from our civilization, like the Western civilization, because in some other parts of the world it's not like that, but we just figured that nature, so to say, is something around us, you know, some kind of a setup where we're living, and that we could exploit those resources and ecosystems and animals just for our own pleasure and to create economical growth. And forgetting the fact that we are part of those ecosystems, we are nature, and destroying all those, you know, forests and mountains, and just keep on fishing more fish than, you know, than it's reasonable to do, is just a way to harm us. It's just destroying the conditions that, you know, that we need to live on that planet happily. And I mean, we need those ecosystems to breathe, to eat, to drink. And maybe the best character to me, it's not the best character of the movie, but the guy that you know struck me the most was this philosopher Baptiste Morisot, who is basically saying we are living creatures around living creatures, and we need to share the space, and we need to figure out how to find some kind of balance between all these different forms of life. And if we don't do that, we are going to be in real trouble. And decarbonization of society is not, I mean, the main priority that we have. The main priority is to understand how those ecosystems are working and how we can keep on, you know, producing for what we need. I mean, we need to eat, we need to build some roads, maybe some buildings, but at the same time, we need to defend life on this planet and enrich life. And how can we human beings how can we have some kind of regenerative economy? It's not only polluting less, it's how to repair what we've been destroying for decades now.
Yeah. It's a question I've thought about a lot in my own work, actually, the sort of how to theorize the human-non-human relationship. And something I've come up against in sort of grappling with different theorists and thinkers on this question is the role of politics, right? And sort of trying to lean into the idea of humans as creatures that are fundamentally dependent on the rest of the living world to literally survive, but also creatures that have invented this domain of politics and what that means in terms of trying to, I mean, fundamentally, it starts to feel like the solution is asking people to let go of power, right? And sort of think more expansively in terms of who they're serving. So that was just a thought that came to mind as you were talking.
Yeah, definitely. But the interesting thing about what Baptiste Morisot wrote lately, and I think that his book is now in English, so maybe you can read it. The French title is Manière d'être vivant, and I think there is an English title. Do you remember, Shanny? Not really. Your microphone is off.
Sounds like ways of living.
Okay, yeah, something like that. The really interesting, thought in his book is the fact that we would need to organize some kind of diplomatic relationship with other species, and I think it's brilliant. I mean, to arrive on some kind of territory, and wolves are, inhabiting this territory, so you need to get in touch with them, to communicate with them, and to be able to have different forms of communication to tell them, okay, we are going to stay around here, and maybe you can stay around there. And we're not doing that. I mean, we're just assuming that we have the right to take all the space,
right?
And that all the other species do not matter at all. So it's a proposition about doing politics, but with the non-human animals. And I think it's brilliant.
Maybe we can talk a little bit about that rabbit scene in particular. It'd be really interesting to hear about the genesis of that scene and how it came about. One thing that's really striking in that chapter is I forget his name, the farmer, was it Laurent?
Laurent.
Yeah.
Laurent.
There's a sort of pride of work that is going on for him, and obviously even allowing the cameras into that space, which would never happen in the US, was really, there's something really sincere about, obviously, there's a real pride of work, and his sort of, the way he's come to terms with the idea that, like, it could be worse, it could be 50 rabbits in the same space, but he ate, or something like that, but I'm curious how that relationship came about for you, and how he left the interaction, and maybe what his response to the film has been.
It's actually really hard to go into those kind of farms to film, because most of the time you're not allowed to go, because people are not really proud of doing it, and they're also really afraid of, I don't know, some kind of nasty vegan activists who are going to go there to destroy everything. So at some point we were looking for a farmer who would agree with talking with us, and this guy was actually interested in talking about the difficulty of his work. He felt kind of abandoned. That's pretty much what he's saying in the movie. Everybody's making money out of their activities except us, and we're doing all the work. So it's not right. And at some point he didn't want to be on screen. So we thought about some kind of setup where it would be, you know, we say hors champ in French. And we would just have filmed Bella and Vipulan and hear his voice and maybe change his voice so that people would not recognize him. And in fact, when we arrived for the shooting, we arrived the night before, and we spent a lot of time talking, and he just realized that we were not against him, and it was not a kind of trap. And so at some point he said, okay, I'm going to be on screen, but I'm only going to say things that would, that would not hurt my colleagues, the people who are doing the same work. And on the other part, I did not tell Bella and Vipulan what they were going to see inside the buildings. So I kept them in the dark as long as I could. And at the very last moment, they just entered the building, and I wanted people to see on their face the feelings they had. And it was a mix of being angry, sad, this like feeling that it was some kind of disgusting place. And so at the beginning of the sequence, you feel all that, and you're kind of, mad about the farmer, and maybe you want to make fun of him in some way because he's like this guy who doesn't really understand what the problem is. And at some point, because he was like genuine and really sincere and just explaining what his work was about and explaining Bella and Vipulan that he had no choice. I mean, if people want to eat meat every day, and if they want to buy cheap meat, that's just the way you have to, to raise animals to do that. And you can see on their face that they understand, and they just understand that you cannot really do it otherwise, in some other way. And the shift in the sequence is when they understand that he's not making any money out of it. It's like making like 350 euros every month. And at some point, they just realized that, as you were mentioning before, is a victim of the system. And he is in some kind of a cage with his rabbit. And so they kind of sympathize with him at this point. And most of the people in the theaters were feeling the same way. And that's the strong, the strong part of the sequence, the fact that you don't really know what to think about that anymore. And to me, that was one of the main objectives, and that's why I was happy to hear you say that. I wanted people to go out of the movie with more questions than answers, because I mean, nobody knows how to stop the 6 mass extinction. I mean, we know technically, but human beings are not rational people. I mean, if that would be that easy to know what the problem is and to know what solutions we could implement, we would have solved the ecological crisis by now. But we're not like that.
And
yeah, I wanted just to add that I also found that to be one of the most moving scenes in the movie, and I like the way you didn't make him into an enemy, and also that led to really understanding that there are systemic problems that need to be thought about, and structural problems, and that it's a matter of how the whole social and economic system works, and that that needs to be put into question on a larger scale. And so I wanted to ask you,
and to add just a little thing about that was exactly the objective of that sequence, to show people that it's a systemic problem. and that we're spending so much time to make people feeling guilty because they're eating meat, taking their car, taking planes from time to time. But most of them don't really have a choice. I mean, I was in the US like 10 days ago at Stanford University, because we organized the screening of Animal, and Animal was part of a program for the new students of Stanford. And what strikes me every time I'm coming to your country is the fact that it's been designed for cars and planes. So how can people just, do it without a car? I mean, you can do it inside New York City or inside San Francisco, but if you're living, I don't know, in Ohio or in North Carolina, if you don't want to take a car because of climate change, how can you do it? You can't, because it's urbanism. It's the way it's been designed. And for many other things, it's the same problem. I mean, if you look at the plastic problem in India, which is huge, I mean, they have no garbage can. I mean, supermarkets and companies are selling plastic to these people, and they don't really have the choice of buying things without plastic in many stores. And once they have those plastic bottles, for example, what can they do with them? They don't have garbage can. They don't have enough people to recycle and to just take care of it. So I remember we were shooting people in a village just by the river, and we were talking about plastic, and they were like, we have nowhere to put that plastic. So most of the time we put it inside the river because we don't know what to do with it. And we're trying to make those people responsible of the situation, but they're not. It's really really a political and a systemic problem that needs to be solved by governments. I mean, national and local governments, and by laws.
Yeah, and that underlines the limits to what well-meaning individuals can do in terms of making particular changes in their life, changing their light bulbs and recycling plastic, and that's important to act at that level, but it doesn't get at the systemic problems that need to
that is really important.
It is really important.
And you can do great things. I mean, when you look at Afros Shah, it was unbelievable. I mean, that guy did such a huge work, getting thousands of people on board to help him, but it's endless. I mean, it's never going to stop unless we're just stopping the plastic from being produced.
So that leads me to a question about, to continue the line of reasoning about politics. We can be effective when we gather together and pool our efforts and energies and resources. And you have been very active in the climate movement. And I wondered if you just would share with us a little bit about your thoughts about where the climate movement is today. If you were the climate czar, what would you have the climate movement be doing that it's not doing as effectively or as well or on the large scale that it needs to be done?
To me, the climate movement has been really weak these last, 30 years, and it's getting a little bit better since, I would say, 2018, mainly thanks to the young people, doing climate strikes in the streets, and because we experienced like 4 or 5 very terrible summers with droughts and huge fires, and people are starting to realize that maybe something is going wrong. But to me, what we did not do very well, and I include myself in it because I've been part of it for many years, is having a strategy. I mean, what do we want to achieve? do we want to make governments change? And if so, what we're doing right now, I mean, going in the streets is definitely not enough to achieve some kind of changes like that. I mean, when you look at private companies, they're just hiring people to do aggressive lobbying in the Congress and in the Congress in the US or at the European Parliament, and spending a lot of money to influence government decisions. And we would need to do that. I mean, we would need to have lobbyists for the general interest. I mean, lobbyists who would produce some reports and spend a lot of time to explain to every congressman or woman what is at stake. I mean, if you are passing that bill, that is what is going to happen. And if you're passing another kind of bill, this is the consequences that we are going to see. We need that. And we need to link that work of lobbying with the mobilization. I mean, we need to mobilize people for really concrete objectives. For example, if we are fighting to pass a bill to stop plastic from being produced, okay, let's get people on the street for that. And let's try to find how we can win that fight. And sorry, it's been a long day and I'm losing a little bit my English, but there is a great activist from Serbia called Zdra Popovic. He was part of the movement who got rid of Milosevic at the beginning of this century in Serbia. And he's saying that a big victory is une grande victoire. It's I'm going to say it in French. Une grande victoire, c'est une succession de petites victoires atteignables. It's a succession of small victory that you can reach. And you need to know where you want to go and then find the different steps that you can settle. And the first step needs to be something that you are able to achieve. Otherwise, you spend your life trying to change something that is too big for you. And at some point, you just feel depressed and despaired because it's never enough. You're not, and you feel so bad about it because it's never enough. So you need to win from time to time, even if it's smaller victory. But these small victories needs to be like steps of a ladder to get you to the place where you want to go at the end of your strategy. And there is no such thing in the climate movement. And I've been, talking to my friends for years about it, saying we need to organize ourselves. We need to find a lot of money. We need to have also people working in the medias. To go in the mainstream medias to try to talk about the issues that we are working on at the parliament, in the streets, and to change the mindset of the people about it. And we need to do these three things: lobbying, mobilizing, and doing that work in the media at the same time around the same objectives. Otherwise, NGOs that are campaigning, for example, about, I don't know, GMOs or pesticides, when there is no bill to pass at the parliament, it's useless. I mean, it's all right. We're trying to tell people that pesticides are harming biodiversity and insects, but then what? I mean, it's not really effective. I don't know if that was really clear, but I did my best.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I think I want to, at this point, give a shout out in response to what you said for your film tomorrow, because I think another way of going about this is to find examples of all kinds of constructive and productive actions that are being taken at the local level. And whether it's, you know, a city in the case of Copenhagen, or a business or a farm, you profile in tomorrow the 1,400 organic farms that have sprouted up in Detroit as part of a whole new food systems network. So I think if anyone hasn't seen that film yet, it's available, I think, on Amazon Prime. And that, because I think one of the things that's difficult is to, once you need to explain the urgency of the situation and mobilize people, but if the message is always negative, then people lose hope, and they think it's pointless to try to make any kind of change or any kind of difference. And I think tomorrow is a wonderful example of the importance of telling new stories, as you say, and of showing positive examples of what can be done at the local level. And apparently that film inspired all kinds of people to take action, and which is what led you to making After Tomorrow, to track some of those changes. I'm worried about time, or I'm aware of time, because we promised to keep you for only 45 minutes. And I do want to turn over to questions from the audience. So maybe, but you did agree to perhaps share a poetry reading with us in this session, talking about the importance of art and music and poetry to help us think about how to find our way forward. And so would you like to perhaps share a short poem with us, and then we'll segue to questions from the audience?
All right, it's going to be in French, so if you don't understand French, all my apologies for that.
Okay.
À l'ombre des herbes folles, prairies endiablées, enivrées de ciel et de bourdonnement, embaumées de trèfle et de genièvre, ici ou ailleurs, les bras abandonnés et le cœur au repos. Rien de plus que cela. There you go.
It's really beautiful. And where can we find your poems in publication? Are there? I'm sure they're not available in English translation.
France, Belgium, Canada. No, it's only in French, and there is one book called À l'orée du danger, and it's published by Actes Sud in France, and another book called Assis sur le fil, published by La Table Ronde, which is part of Gallimard.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. So now we have several questions. The first from Sophie: how would Cyril engage students in American universities and young people in general in creating the new narratives much needed to change our damaging lifestyles, in particular in the US, where the capitalistic narrative is so prevalent? And then I'll add a second question that's somewhat associated to that one. Does Cyril think that a film production company like Newtopia, the one he's recently co-created, would be a good approach in the US to inspire new narratives? So, first two questions.
I didn't talk about that much, but to me, we are experiencing some kind of a imagination crisis. We're not really good at imagining what the future could look like, except, you know, doom and apocalyptic movies and books. And I mean, if you think about all the movies that are trying to imagine the future, it's like the living world has just vanished in some way. It's whether hyper technological world like Blade Runner or so on, or the last one like Blade Runner 2049, there is no trees. There are no trees anymore. There is a huge fog around the cities, and if you think about movies like Mad Max or so on, it's always a terrible future. So we need to, and that was the purpose of Tomorrow, the movie we did with Mélanie Laurent, is what it was, to try to imagine what the future could look like if we would put together some of the best solutions we already know. I mean, if you think about the people who are trying to invent new ways of doing agriculture, of creating currencies, of producing energy, of new democratic processes, new ways to educate the kids. Many peoples around the world are trying to invent new things, new way of life. And I would, definitely suggest to American students to dig for that. I mean, to try to find the books, the movies, and or the people around you who are already doing it, and to try to wonder how you would like to live in the future, in what kind of world, and to try to participate to create that world through the job you're doing, through the way you're, building your house, or doing agriculture, feeding yourself. We need to stop thinking that capitalism and our economic systems are the only way. That's what Margaret Thatcher was saying in the 80s. There is no alternative. And that's terrible to say such kind of thing. There are many, many alternatives. That the system we're living in has been set up by people, so people can definitely change it. There's no arguing about that.
Okay, we have another question.
And sorry about Newtopia. Yes, it's a company that we launched with Marion Cotillard at the last Cannes Festival. And the objective is to produce many movies and series trying to create new ways to imagine the futures, the future. And that's the point. I mean, American, culture has been very successful to spread its message through movies and through series and through advertising since the 50s, I would say. And the American way of life just spread all around the world. And now we need to invent some kind of ecological way of life. And to spread an ecological way of life, we need a lot of stories talking about it and showing new heroes and new ways to inhabit the world, and stories are really good to do that.
Do you have any other favorite thinkers or storytellers to recommend in addition to Baptiste Morisot, who's interviewed in your film and you talked about earlier?
If you didn't read the Donut Theory, it's a really great book about how we could organize our economy differently. It's from Kate Raworth, I think. You could definitely read the books of Philippe Descola. It's a famous French anthropologist. If you didn't read the books of Richard Powers, and especially the Other Story, you should definitely read that. If you didn't read Into the Forest of Jean Egland, you should definitely read that. And that's a novel. And many more, I guess.
Those are some great suggestions. Thank you so much. I'll just ask you one more question, which is that we preach about the environmental urgency of garbage production. The prime culprit enabler of the environmentally detrimental overconsumption is Amazon. When will environmentally conscious people start boycotting the systems and structures which cause the problem?
That's a huge question, actually, because Amazon is now so powerful that it can, thrive the market for many things. I'm actually working on a movie trying to understand how companies can do their inner transition to be carbon neutral, and I'm doing some work with the post office in France. And the post office in France needs now to adjust to what Amazon is doing, which is deliver boxes in 2 hours. And the problem is that people are ordering things on the internet more and more and more. So they're doing such a great jobs to limit the carbon footprint of every box. But since the number of box is increasing dramatically, I mean, it's going to be 100% more boxes in 2030. The carbon emission of the post office is just going up and up and up and up. And that's the problem of our economic system, just trying to have an infinite, growth. And Amazon is a great example of that. I mean, they're now thinking about digging the moon to find, metals for, so to say, energetic transition to make electric cars. And it's just madness, because we're not questioning that particular problem of infinite growth in a finite system,
finite planet in a finite world. Yes.
And as long as we are not questioning that, I mean, we can do all the efforts we want, as long as a company is just trying to develop itself through making more money, producing more goods, selling more things. It's never going to end. So we need to think about that, and maybe we need to think a little bit more about slowing down and what do we really want in our life, what is making us happy or not, and do we need to have more and more stuff all the time to be happy, or do we need to have great relationships with the people we love and to spend time with them? And how can we do that? And how can we shift our economy on that direction?
Yes, well, I guess we are perhaps ending with more questions than answers, but those are all questions that we should continue to think about. And I want to just end by thanking you so much for offering us these wonderful films that are so beautifully made, as Leah said, and also really, really thought-provoking and hope-giving. So thank you so much. Thanks for taking the time to join us today, and good luck with your continuing activities. Thanks so much to you, Leah, as well, for joining us.
Thank you so much.
All right, bonne continuation.
Merci, à vous aussi.
Au revoir.
Bye bye.